What's poppin', my Daredevils? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. The Season 1 finale of Daredevil Born Again has just dropped, and boy did it bring the devil out of both Matt Murdock and the Kingpin of crime. So let's go ahead and talk about it already. Heavy spoilers coming your way for the finale, so don't say I didn't warn you. The episode begins with the sounds of storm clouds rising, Let's Go Home by the Florida Mass Choir, just like it did at the end of the previous episode. The screen is once again covered in a blue tint to both match Bullseye's blue color theme and to get the audience to experience Bullseye's cult perspective when he's not on his medication. This shot of one of the deadliest hunters of the MCU staring down his sights is then immediately followed by the image of a deer, one of nature's most hunted prey. This transition would prove to be an appropriate one considering the subject matter of the following scene, which sees Vanessa Fisk having marksman Benjamin Poindexter released from prison a year prior. Vanessa Fisk was apparently able to do this due to the law finding out about the corruption of the FBI, which we saw play out in the third season of the Netflix Daredevil show, especially when Special FBI Agent Ray Nadeem was caught working with Wilson Fisk specifically to advance his own career and better his family life. But Nadeem would of course be brutally murdered by Bullseye himself at the end of the day. But yeah, as Vanessa and Benjamin chat, I love how a poster with the words, "Do more of what makes you happy," is deliberately placed between the two of them, as this conversation would be centered around Vanessa trying to convince Bullseye to do more of what makes him happy, which is killing people from a distance with insane accuracy. And at Bullseye's immediate left is a baseball, an extremely irresponsible thing to have next to a psycho marksman who used to throw no-hitters as a pitcher on his childhood baseball team. Like, this kid literally killed his baseball coach with a baseball by purposely having that baseball ricochet into his coach's head. Like, seeing that flashback recreated in episode 5 of season 3 of Daredevil was such a disturbing look into Bullseye's early mental derangement. And like I theorized last week, it appears that Vanessa Fisk had Bullseye conditionally released so that he could assassinate both Foggy Nelson and Foggy Nelson's client, Benjamin Kafara, most commonly known on the streets as Dumb Benny. Dumb Benny's case was about to expose some crucial information about Vanessa Fisk and her growing empire that she could not afford to risk getting out there. So she saw Benjamin Poindexter as the most efficient and reliable way to ensure that her illegal business practices were never exposed. And we would learn later that Vanessa Fisk was actually trying to prevent Foggy from bringing attention to the March 6, 1855 charter of the Port of Red Hook, a charter that specifically designates the Red Hook port as a free port, one that is apparently completely exempt from all taxes, tariffs, and customs duties on any goods and merchandise that flow on through. I wish America was immune to tariffs, but we are not. Look at that NASDAQ drop. But the only caveat about this charter is that all of these goods and services must meet the criteria set by the governing authorities, which in this case is, of course, Mayor Fisk and his now legally sanctioned criminal enterprise that went full fascism mode. Now that Mayor Fisk is doing his fascism thing by making sure that both the police and those duly elected officials are all going to maintain loyalty to him, he can now give himself the green light to allow any sort of criminal trade that he desires, whether that be in guns, drugs, or whatever. Like, Vanessa Fisk was using Red Hook to illegally move her expensive art pieces around for years, and now her husband has made moves for the both of them to store a lot more than just paintings. But what's especially wild is how heartless and manipulative Vanessa is when she physically pulls Bullseye's medication away from him, telling him that his meds were only keeping him from being his true self. Yet another way this series explores the concept of masking identities. However, in this case, the medication putting a muzzle on Bullseye's psychotic side might not be the worst thing in the world. However, Vanessa does not think so and is more than willing to try to manipulate a mentally unwell man into taking lives in order to make her own life better, truly showing how much of a sociopath Vanessa has become ever since becoming involved with Wilson. And what's particularly interesting about her conversation with Benjamin is how she grabs his hands while encouraging him to be his best unstable self, with the camera purposely focusing on that hand contact. I feel like this was meant to show how Vanessa tends to admire the hands of those who are proficient in their craft, admiring Bullseye's hands much like she admired the artistic hands of her former fling Adam. However, much like Adam, Vanessa would ultimately betray Bullseye after using his hands for her own ends. Kind of makes me wonder whether or not Vanessa will end up betraying Kingpin in the end, but We'll see. Then after the intro, we catch up with Matt in the hospital, recovering from the bullet that he took for that bald bastard. And when he gains consciousness, Matt instinctively calls out for Karen Page instead of his girlfriend Heather, which appears to hurt Heather greatly, especially after Heather hinted that she was a little jealous of Matt's previous relationship with Karen in an earlier episode. Matt tries to tell Kirsten that Vanessa Fisk hired Bullseye to kill Foggy, but both her and Heather just look at Matt like he's crazy, with Heather eventually joining Wilson Fisk in his task force as a mental health liaison. Meanwhile, both Wilson and Vanessa both console each other at home following their brush with death. Wilson still has Matt Murdock's blood splattered on the center of his white shirt, an image that not only reflects the image of the series' other main villain Muse, who also had a red splotch of blood on the center of his chest, but it also symbolically evokes a bit of Christian symbolism as well, as New York's Kingpin of Sinners is literally covered by the blood of New York's holy savior, much like how the blood of Christ was symbolically meant to save sinners in the Bible. Fisk then reveals to his wife that his whole Red Hook revitalization project was initiated so that the Fisk empire could funnel billions of dollars through that port, with Mayor Fisk purposely letting gang and vigilante chaos run rampant in the streets for a while so he could justify the formation of his unethical task force of brutally corrupt police officers. And as Wilson lays out his plan to his wife, her face beams with pride and adoration, almost like she's starting to view her own husband as an artist in his own right. But instead of creating art in the more traditional ways, she's watching Wilson craft the entire city of New York into something new that they can both call their own. But anyways, soon after this, we see Mayor Fisk directing the police chief and his task force to lock down the bridges and tunnels in order to hunt down Bullseye and any other vigilantes that they can find, encouraging the use of brutal and/or lethal force in order to establish dominance and strength following the attempt on his life. And even though his life was just saved by his arch nemesis Daredevil, Kingpin does not waste a second of his time considering showing Matt Murdock a smidgen of mercy, going so far as to order Buck Cashman to kill Matt Murdock at the hospital while he was weakened in order to both exact his revenge and keep Matt from telling anyone about what he learned about the circumstances of Foggy's murder. When Buck Cashman arrives at the hospital to do the deed, a rendition of Killing Me Softly with his song can be heard playing out of some speakers nearby. Extremely fitting considering that Buck is there to kill Matthew softly himself, even going as far as to bring Matthew his own soft teddy bear in a Daredevil red gift bag like the good Christian boy that Buck is. And hey, speaking of gifts, don't forget to stop by the Heavy Spoiler store to pick up one of our 2 double-sided Daredevil Born Again inspired shirts, especially since we just dropped our new Retribution shirt inspired by the Punisher Frank Castle. On the back of that shirt is a sick as hell design of a bunch of guns in the form of a skull, and on the front of the shirt is a picture of a kid saying, "Go get 'em." But if conviction is more your style, then why not pick up one of our red conviction shirts instead, which features a hero praying without fear with a sonar halo on the back and the swords and scales of Lady Justice on the front. Pick up one of these 2 incredibly sick ass designs over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store today. But yeah, unfortunately for Buck and Kingpin, Matt got shot in the chest and not the ears, and was able to use those ears in order to detect the footsteps of coming danger. And Buck tried to time his assassination with Kingpin's planned blackout of the city, capitalizing on the chaos that was soon to follow, much like it did when New York City blacked out in 1977. Like, that was for sure a shit show and a half back then. Also, A Dark in New York kind of reminds me of what happened during the events of Secret Empire, specifically in Secret Empire #0, when evil Hydra Cap blackened the entire city of New York with dark force magic. However, I feel like Kingpin's blackout could also potentially explain one of the MCU's most recent and biggest mysteries that came in the form of the title reveal for Spider-Man 4. While the title for Spider-Man Brand New Day is a reference to a popular arc of Spider-Man comics following the end of Peter Parker and Mary Jane's relationship at the hands of Mephisto, I feel like Spider-Man Brand New Day will only be stealing the name of that arc while not necessarily adapting the actual story, much like how Daredevil Born Again is not actually an adaptation of the Born Again story arc. In my opinion, the title Brand New Day might just refer to Kingpin's citywide blackout, and the trials that Spider-Man had to go through during this blackout period while also being hunted down by Mayor Fisk's Safer Streets initiative. Then, when the power returns to the city, ushering in a brand new day for New York following the chaos, I can totally see Spider-Man joining the vigilante resistance founded by Daredevil. And I also wouldn't be surprised if this is when we'll see the official debut of Angelo Del Toro White Tiger before seeing all 3 of these heroes heroes team up to fight on the streets of New York. So the Brand New Day name could just be referring to this overall idea of how wildly difficult Spider-Man's life becomes after New York City's darkest night of public chaos and police cruelty, and how Kingpin's declaration of martial law has ushered in a brand new day of change for superheroes. It's a subtitle that would be kind of similar to that of Captain America Brave New World's title, as that name reflects how Celestial Island ushered in a new type of world for all the nations of the planet. And this theme of darkness and light would also work if the Venom symbiote is potentially going to be involved in Spider-Man 4 as well, as the ending of No Way Home has established a tiny bit of symbiote goo crawling around the MCU somewhere. But the only good part about a citywide blackout was that Matt was able to walk his bare ass home in a hospital gown without anyone giving him a second look. But when he arrives, he finds his favorite mentally unstable therapist, Frank Castle, waiting for him, courtesy of Karen Page. But the two would not have long to chat when the mayor's task force, headed by Cole North, rolls up on Matt's apartment immediately. Then the boys get to work doing what they do best, making bad guys bleed. And good God, did Marvel Studios not hold back in the blood and violence department for a second here. Frank Castle was going in on those fools, man, completely ignoring Matt's calls for mercy, except in the case of Cole North, who we learned was responsible for shooting White Tiger point blank in the dome after Hector Ayala was found innocent in court. And even though Cole did deserve a bullet in the head himself, Matt is still able to be mindful of his own dark emotions, rooted in his own loss, and deliberately chooses to be merciful instead, deciding that broken limbs and internal bleeding is good enough punishment for this asshole. But luckily for Frank, Mr. North would still end up heading south to the pits of hell after one of his boys would toss a grenade into Matt's apartment, blowing it to Kingdom Come along with all of Matt's past Daredevil suits as well, including his gold and red Gamma Goon suit that he wore while playing Hide the Zucchini with Jen on the West Coast. Like, if y'all don't think that man's wiener is radioactive, you guys are delusional. Delusional! But anyways, that might just explain why his behind-the-scenes photos from the set of Season 2 show Daredevil with a completely new black suit with the iconic DD logo on it, inspired by the suit that Daredevil wore in the Shadowland story arc. Because Matt Murdock likes to make sure that he does not go to bed without at least one pair of double Ds touching his chest. That's my boy. Luckily, Daredevil and Punisher would jump out of the building just in time to land on a super comfy car hood across the street, with Karen Page herself arriving just in time from California to serve as their Uber driver. Karen then drives the two to Frank Castle's fallout shelter of a hideout where the two recover from their fight. A clock on the wall reads 11:25 p.m. as Frank stitches his wounds up. And next to Frank's mirror, we can see that Frank has a book on special ops fitness training on his shelf in order to keep himself in top form when he goes out killing. And after sewing himself up, Frank offers Karen a cup of coffee, heavily implying that he wants to eat Karen's coffee bean sometime in the near future, an implication that Matt would later confirm when he confesses to listening to their heartbeats later on. Like, it very much seems like Marvel is setting up a bit of a love triangle with Matt, Karen, and Frank that might see the two men at odds in the near future. Matt and Karen then leave, allowing Frank time to get ready to confront Kingpin's task force alone like an absolute madman. Like, this dude straight up just walked into their headquarters with no plan and just started deleting dudes, man. Truly insane behavior. But I cannot say that it was not entertaining. Frank would of course get caught, but the task force would still attempt to recruit his crazy ass, which is somehow even crazier. But Frank would end up telling the entire task force off for adopting the symbol of his personal pain as their own, leading to his eventual imprisonment inside Kingpin's dinner dungeon in Red Hook, with Wilson and Vanessa eating dinner amongst them like the sociopaths that they are. And as they eat, Vanessa sits on the side of the table closest to the blood stain on Wilson's Rabbit in a Snowstorm painting in order to symbolize the blood that she spilled in order to make this reality possible. The image of imprisoned vigilantes like the Punisher and Tony Dalton's swordsman was of course meant to mirror the cruelty of how a certain other American politician cheerfully shoved migrants into cages, separating entire families in the process. It's kind of a bummer that we never actually got to see Swordsman in action at all this season, beyond some cell phone footage. It feels like such a waste of having Tony Dalton on your show if you're not going to show people how impressive Swordsman really is as a full-fledged vigilante hero. But like the good book says, Kevin Feige works in mysterious ways, so maybe they're saving Swordsman's proper costume debut for a specific affair, possibly even Frank Castle's upcoming Disney Plus special presentation, but who knows? All I know is that it doesn't seem like any of these prisoners will be there for very long, especially after seeing Frank Castle secure his freedom after tricking some task force dumbass named Anthony into shaking his hand. Like, why did you even think that the Punisher was going to be your friend in that moment? Like, are you stupid? So yeah, maybe the Punisher and Swordsman do a little team up after this for the Punisher short film before joining up with Daredevil's Resistance. But anyways, as Matt and Karen look over their old files and discover that Red Hook charter that Foggy was going to use for his case, things are becoming quite intense for those on Team Kingpin. We see Daniel Blake doing his best Kingpin impression as he blackmails city councilors for their support, while Sheila betrays Police Commissioner Gallo by reporting his plans of undermining Kingpin to the big man himself, leading to his absolutely brutal execution. However, before charging into Red Hook recklessly, Karen convinces Matt that he can't fight Kingpin and his army all by himself, and that he needs to form an army of his own because he's no longer alone. And in order to sell this idea, Karen brings up how Matt told her in the past that he never feels like he's in the dark, but rather that he's surrounded by 1,000 suns. Like, I truly love this moment of this episode so damn much because they're having this conversation as the stars of the night sky hang above a darkened New York City, symbolizing that even in the darkness, there are still good people with good hearts out there willing to fight for the city. Then the season ends with Daredevil assembling the first soldiers in his resistance army over at Josie's bar, including Josie herself, alongside detectives Angie Kim, Cherry, and a couple of their cop buddies. I very much expect this team to grow with more actual vigilantes, including Swordsman, Angela Del Toro's White Tiger, and maybe even Spider-Man during the events of Spider-Man 4. But yeah, all in all, I really dug this season 1 finale, man. Learning how truly evil Vanessa Fisk has become after seeing her deliberately withhold incredibly crucial and necessary medication meant to keep a living weapon from hurting other people was absolutely insane, man. Not only did she hire a hitman to kill an innocent lawyer and their client, she also deliberately sabotaged the rehabilitation of a sick man for her own ends. That's not just evil, that's straight up diabolical, man. Also, the team up between Daredevil and the Punisher in this episode as they took down the members of Kingpin's lame-ass task force was equal parts incredibly dope and visually cathartic, especially watching that psycho Cole North suffer for the senseless murder of Hector Ayala, the White Tiger. Matt honestly should have just let Frank shoot his ass in my opinion, because screw that guy. Like, watching Vanessa Fisk's character development was truly one of my favorite parts about this series as a whole, because the season basically introduced a second Kingpin into the mix, with Vanessa Fisk acting as the best co-leader of a criminal enterprise that Big Willie could have ever asked for. The decision to bring back actress Eilert Zurer was 100% the right one, and I honestly could not see this season being as effective if they were to have stayed with their previous plan of recasting the role with actress Sandrine Holt. Even though I'm sure Miss Holt would have done a fantastic job with the character, I think that having Eilert herself return in the role once again allows the audience to really appreciate how far this character has come from being just a random humble art curator. And also, despite Marvel Studios having had a fair bit of trouble with the production of their first season of Daredevil, they still managed to make a phenomenal product in the end. And I really think that Kevin Feige and all of the creative minds involved with making the show the way that it was need extra kudos and acknowledgement for their decision to make a drastic creative pivot in the direction of their show in order to make sure that the story was one that Daredevil fans expected and deserved from Charlie Cox's iteration of the character. Like, it really does feel like Marvel Studios learned a massive lesson following the reception of their Secret Invasion series, especially with how smoothly they handled this season's finale in comparison to the clunkiness that was Secret Invasion's finale. Also, I really appreciate how this show felt like a proper TV show rather than just a regular Marvel movie stretched out to look like a TV show, which is what a lot of Marvel Studios' early shows felt like for a while. However, if there is one major negative thing that I will say about this show, is that they kind of sort of wasted Muse as a villain in a big way. Like, I really dug how creepy they made him and how cool a lot of his art looked, but Muse in the Marvel Comics is just a lot more interesting and menacing in my opinion, especially with his inhuman power set of being able to absorb the sensory information around himself to prevent Daredevil from detecting him. As much as I am normally against character resurrections in comic book media, I would not be angry if Muse were to somehow return to a newly reformed MCU following the events of Avengers Secret Wars. hopefully this time with actual superpowers that truly allow him to be one of the mutant saga's most daunting threats. And also, this is kind of a minor nitpick, but I feel like the season very much wasted the characters of Kirsten McDuffie and Detective Cherry. As much as I really enjoy their personalities and the overall performances of their actors, we didn't really learn much about them as people or see them grow in any way. They're pretty much only there to give Matt a piece of information or to make Matt feel guilty about not living up to their expectations. And I really hope that Kirsten in particular is able to become a core member of Karen and Matt's inner circle one day, because I think that she's a friend that Matt really needs in his life. But yeah, that is it for this breakdown of episode 9 of Daredevil Born Again. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and for watching all the breakdowns this season on this channel. You guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed this video. And like I mentioned before, do not forget to hit up the Heavy Spoiler store to pick up one of our 2 Daredevil Born Again inspired shirts, either Conviction or Retribution. Either one, it's gonna look good on your back. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been absolutely amazing, and I'll catch you lovely people again soon. Bye.